The rain drummed against the Seattle pavement like nature's own percussion section, creating rivers that flowed between the cracks of the busy downtown sidewalk. Victoria Chen pulled her worn denim jacket tighter around her shoulders, her art supplies bag growing heavier with each step as she hurried toward the bus stop. The weight of 3 rejected job applications sat heavy in her backpack, along with her sketchbook filled with dreams that seemed to grow more distant each day. At 24, Victoria had learned that life rarely followed the neat trajectories she'd once imagined. Her art degree felt more like expensive paper than a gateway to success, and her part-time job at the campus bookstore barely covered her tiny studio apartment rent. But she refused to give up on her dreams of becoming a professional illustrator. Even when the world seemed determined to crush them, the screech of tires on wet asphalt pierced through the evening noise, followed immediately by a child's terrified scream. Victoria's head snapped up to see a small boy who had somehow slipped from his father's grip. Running directly into the street, as a delivery truck barreled toward him, without thinking, Victoria dropped everything and sprinted forward, her sneakers sliding on the slick pavement. She reached the boy just as the truck driver slammed on his brakes, wrapping her arms around the small figure and rolling them both toward the sidewalk. The truck's bumper missed them by inches, close enough that Victoria could smell the heat from the brakes and feel the wind from its passing. "Tommy," a deep panicked voice boomed across the street. Victoria looked up from where she lay protectively over the boy to see a man in an expensive charcoal suit running toward them, his perfectly styled dark hair disheveled by rain and fear. Even in her adrenaline-fueled state, Victoria recognized the sharp jawline and piercing green eyes that graced magazine covers and business news segments worldwide. Alexander Sterling, the tech mogul whose company had revolutionized online security, knelt beside them with shaking hands. "Are you hurt?" "Tommy, look at me. Are you okay?" The boy, who couldn't be more than 10 years old, had tears streaming down his face, but managed to nod. "I'm sorry, Dad. I saw the dog and I just ran. This lady saved me." Alexander's gaze shifted to Victoria for the first time, really seeing her. She was still sprawled on the wet sidewalk, her long black hair escaping from its ponytail, her jacket torn at the elbow from their tumble. But her dark eyes blazed with a fierce protectiveness that took his breath away. "Are you injured?" asked, his voice softer now, but still commanding attention from everyone within earshot. Victoria pushed herself up, wincing slightly as her scraped palm stung. "I'm fine. Is he really okay?" That was terrifyingly close. "Thanks to you." Alexander stood and extended his hand to help her up. When their fingers touched, Victoria felt an unexpected jolt of electricity that had nothing to do with the storm. "Overhead, I don't know how to thank you. You've saved my son's life." Anyone would have done the same thing, Victoria replied, though they both knew that wasn't true. The crowd of onlookers who had gathered were proof enough that most people froze. In crisis situations, Alexander studied her face intently, noting the genuine modesty in her response. In his world of calculated gestures and hidden motives, her selflessness was refreshing. "Please, let me at least pay for your medical expenses, or replace your torn jacket. Better yet, let me give you a reward for what you've done." Victoria's expression shifted, her warmth cooling to something harder. "I don't want your money, Mr. Sterling. You know who I am?" Alexander seemed surprised, though he shouldn't have been. His face was plastered across financial magazines and tech blogs regularly. "Everyone knows who you are." "That doesn't mean I want anything from you." Victoria began collecting her scattered art supplies, many of which were now soaked and probably ruined. "I'm just glad your son is safe." Alexander watched her gather her belongings, noting the careful way she handled each item despite their damaged state. Her art supplies were clearly well used but cherished, and something about her fierce independence both frustrated and intrigued. "At least let me replace your art materials," he tried again. "I can see they're important to you." Victoria straightened, clutching her waterlogged sketchbook to her chest. "Mr. Sterling, I understand you're used to solving problems with money, but some things can't be bought. I helped your son because it was the right thing to do, not because I expected payment." Tommy tugged on his father's sleeve. "She draws pictures. Look." He pointed to a sketch that had fallen from Victoria's bag. a beautiful pencil drawing of the Seattle skyline that had somehow escaped the worst of the rain damage. Alexander picked up the drawing, studying it with growing appreciation. The detail was exquisite, capturing not just the buildings but the soul of the city itself. "This is remarkable. You're very talented." "Thank you," Victoria said simply, reaching for the sketch. "You're an artist," Alexander continued, his business mind already working. "I could introduce you to gallery owners, collectors who would appreciate work like this. My company sponsors several art exhibitions each year." "Stop." Victoria's voice cut through his offers like a knife. "You're doing it again. Just because you have money doesn't mean you can fix everything or everyone. I don't need to be your charity case." The words stung Alexander more than he expected. He was genuinely trying to help, but he realized how his offers must sound to someone like her. Someone who clearly valued her independence above all else. Tommy stepped between them, his young face serious. "Dad, you're being weird." The nice lady doesn't want money. Maybe she just wants to be our friend. Out of the mouths of babes, Alexander felt heat rise in his cheeks as he realized his son had more emotional intelligence than he did in this moment. "You're right, Tommy." Alexander looked at Victoria with new eyes, seeing past his initial impulse to categorize and control. "I apologize. I'm not usually this graceless. Would you allow me to buy you coffee? It's not as payment or charity, but as a simple thank you between two people who shared a terrifying moment." Victoria hesitated, studying Alexander's face for signs of condescension or hidden agendas. Instead, she saw genuine remorse and something that might have been vulnerability beneath his polished exterior. "I suppose coffee would be okay," she said finally. "But I choose the place. Somewhere normal, not whatever five-star establishment you probably frequent." Alexander smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face from intimidating business mogul to something much more human.
Deal.
"Though I should warn you, Tommy has very strong opinions about hot chocolate quality." "The more chocolate, the better," Tommy declared solemnly. "That's the rule." Victoria found herself laughing despite everything. "I think I'm going to like having coffee with you too." As they walked toward the small cafe Victoria had chosen, Alexander found himself studying her profile in the streetlight. She moved with unconscious grace despite her simple clothing, and there was an inner strength about her that drew him like a magnet. For the first time in years, he was genuinely curious about another person, not for what they could do for his business, but for who they were beneath the surface. Victoria, meanwhile, snuck glances at the famous billionaire walking beside her. Without the armor of his usual corporate settings, Alexander Sterling seemed younger, more approachable. The way he fussed over Tommy showed a tender side that the media never captured, and she found herself wondering what other surprises lay hidden beneath his public persona. Neither of them could have predicted that this chance encounter on a rainy Seattle evening would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves, about love, and about what truly mattered in life. The collision of their two very different worlds was about to create something neither money nor independence alone could achieve. The little cafe Victoria had chosen was a world away from Alexander's usual haunts. Mismatched furniture, local art on the walls, and the comforting aroma of fresh coffee beans created an atmosphere that was both cozy and unpretentious. Alexander found himself fascinated by how different it felt from the sterile elegance of his typical meeting places. "This is perfect," Tommy announced, sliding into a worn booth with obvious delight. "It's like the cafes and movies where normal people go." Victoria raised an eyebrow at Alexander. "Normal people?" "Tommy's been a bit sheltered," Alexander admitted, looking slightly embarrassed. "Private schools, corporate events, carefully managed social situations. This is probably more real-world interaction than he's had in months." The waitress, a college-aged girl with purple streaks in her hair, approached their table with a warm smile. "What can I get you folks tonight?" "Hot chocolate with extra marshmallows," Tommy said immediately. Maybe some of those cookies in the case." "Coming right up, sweetie." The waitress turned to Victoria. "The usual Vic. You know her?" Alexander asked, surprised by the familiar interaction. "Victoria's been coming here for 3 years," the waitress, whose name tag read Jenny, explained. "Always orders the same thing, black coffee and whatever pastry is about to expire so she can get the discount." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks. Jenny, you don't need to share my entire financial situation with everyone. Sorry, Jenny grinned apologetically. But it's true. You're our most loyal broke customer. After Jenny left, an awkward silence settled over the table. Alexander was processing this glimpse into Victoria's daily struggles, while Victoria felt exposed and vulnerable under his scrutiny. You come here often? Alexander asked, trying to keep his tone light. Most days after classes or work, Victoria replied, stirring sugar into her coffee when it arrived. It's quiet, the Wi-Fi is free, and nobody bothers me while I draw. Tommy leaned forward eagerly. Can you show us some of your drawings? Dad collects art, but it's all boring old stuff that nobody understands. Tommy, Alexander warned gently. Though he was equally curious about Victoria's work, Victoria hesitated, then pulled out her sketchbook. Despite the earlier rain damage, many of the pages were still intact. She flipped through them slowly, revealing a world captured in pencil and charcoal, street musicians, elderly couples on park benches, children playing, the hidden poetry of everyday life. Alexander found himself genuinely moved by what he saw. These weren't the abstract pieces that decorated his office walls or the investment art that filled his penthouse. These drawings had soul, capturing moments of human connection and emotion with startling honesty. These are extraordinary, he said softly, studying a particularly striking sketch of a homeless veteran feeding pigeons in a park. You have a gift for seeing beauty in places most people overlook. That's the point, Victoria replied, her passion evident in her voice. Art should reflect real life, real people. It's not just pretty things for rich people to hang on their walls. The comment stung, though Alexander suspected it wasn't entirely intentional. Not all collectors are looking for status symbols. Some of us genuinely appreciate artistic vision. Maybe, Victoria conceded, but how many artists actually get to eat while pursuing their vision? The art world is just another place where money determines who gets heard and who gets ignored. Tommy, who had been quietly studying the drawings, spoke up. Why don't you sell these? They're really good. Victoria smiled sadly. It's not that simple, Tommy. Getting your art noticed requires connections, gallery representation, marketing budgets, things that cost money I don't have. Alexander's business mind immediately began calculating possibilities. He knew gallery owners, collectors, art dealers who would be fascinated by Victoria's work. The problem was figuring out how to help without triggering her fierce independence again. What if someone wanted to commission a piece? He asked carefully. Purely business transaction, nothing else. Victoria's eyes narrowed. What kind of commission? A portrait of Tommy and me. Something personal, not the formal paintings my mother keeps commissioning from society artists. Tommy's face lit up. That would be so cool. Could you draw us at the park? Or maybe playing video games? Victoria looked between father and son, seeing genuine enthusiasm rather than pity. I suppose I could do that. What would you pay for something like that? Named a figure that made Victoria's coffee cup rattle against its saucer. That's ridiculous. I've never charged anywhere near that much for anything. Then you've been undervaluing your work, Alexander replied firmly. I've seen what passes for art in galleries where pieces sell for 10 times that amount. Your work has something most of them lack: authenticity. Over the next 2 hours, they talked about everything and nothing. Tommy regaled Victoria with stories about his school friends and his latest video game conquests. Alexander found himself sharing memories of his own childhood, stories he hadn't thought about in years. Victoria spoke about her dreams of illustrating children's books, her volunteer work at the local community center, and her complicated relationship with her immigrant parents, who wanted her to pursue a more practical career as the evening progressed. Alexander began to see past Victoria's defensive exterior to the passionate, determined woman beneath. She was unlike anyone in his usual social circle, unimpressed by wealth, unafraid to challenge his assumptions, and completely genuine in every interaction. Victoria, meanwhile, was discovering that Alexander Sterling the person was far more complex than Alexander Sterling the public figure. He listened intently when she spoke, asked thoughtful questions, and showed genuine interest in her perspective on art and life. More importantly, she could see how much he loved his son. how he tried to balance protecting Tommy with giving him normal experiences. "I should probably get going," Victoria said reluctantly as the cafe began to empty. "I have an early class tomorrow. Let me drive you home," Alexander offered immediately. "I can take the bus." "Victoria, it's nearly midnight and still raining. Please let me do this one small thing without making it into a battle about independence." Something in his tone made her relent. "Fine, but no fancy car. Tommy's probably tired." Alexander smiled, pulling out his phone to call his driver. "Nothing fancy, I promise." 20 minutes later, Victoria stared in disbelief at the sleek black sedan that pulled up to the curb.
Oh.
"You call this not fancy? For me, this is practically a bicycle," Alexander replied with a grin that was becoming increasingly familiar and dangerous to Victoria's peace of mind. The drive to Victoria's neighborhood took them through parts of Seattle that Alexander rarely saw. Run-down apartment buildings, late-night convenience stores, streets that spoke of dreams deferred and struggles endured. He found himself looking at the city through new eyes, seeing it as Victoria must see it every day. When they stopped in front of Victoria's building, Alexander got out to walk her to the door despite her protests. Tommy had fallen asleep in the back seat, his peaceful face illuminated by passing streetlights. "Thank you for tonight, Alexander," said quietly as they stood under the flickering porch light. "I can't remember the last time I had such a genuinely enjoyable evening." "It was nice," Victoria admitted, surprised by how true that was. "Tommy's a great kid. You're doing something right." High praise from someone who clearly doesn't give compliments easily. Victoria smiled, a real smile that transformed her entire face. "Don't let it go to your head, Mr. Sterling." "Alexander," he corrected gently. "After tonight, I think we can manage first names." "Alexander," she repeated, and something about the way she said his name made his pulse quicken. They stood there for a moment, the air between them, charged with possibility. Alexander found himself wanting to ask when he could see her again, wanting to extend this unexpected connection. But something in Victoria's posture warned him not to push too hard too fast. "About that commission," Victoria said, breaking the spell. Alexander watched her climb the stairs to her building, waiting until she was safely inside before returning to the car. As his driver pulled away from the curb, he found himself already planning reasons to see her again. In her tiny studio apartment, Victoria stood at her window watching the sedan disappear into the night. She told herself this was just a business transaction, just a commission that would help pay her bills. But the flutter in her stomach when Alexander smiled suggested her heart might have other ideas entirely. 3 weeks later, Victoria had completed 2 preliminary sketches for Alexander's commission and discovered that working with the Sterling family was unlike any professional relationship she'd ever experienced. Instead of formal meetings in corporate offices, their sessions took place in parks, at Tommy's soccer games, and even once at an arcade where Alexander proved surprisingly competitive at vintage pinball machines. The more time she spent with them, the more complicated her feelings became. Alexander was nothing like the cold, calculating businessman portrayed in media profiles. He was thoughtful, surprisingly funny, and completely devoted to giving Tommy as normal a childhood as possible, despite their extraordinary circumstances. But it was precisely his wealth and influence that made Victoria increasingly uncomfortable. "Dad's been different since he met you," Tommy confided during one of their sketching sessions at the park. "He smiles more. And he actually turned down a business trip to come to my school play." Victoria looked up from her drawing pad to see Alexander approaching with coffee and Tommy's favorite hot chocolate from a nearby vendor. He moved with unconscious confidence, his expensive casual wear somehow making him look more attractive rather than pretentious. The problem was that Victoria was beginning to care about him far more than was wise. "How's the artistic process going?" Alexander asked, settling beside them on the park bench. "She's drawing us feeding the ducks," Tommy explained excitedly. "But she says I need to stop making funny faces." "The faces are the best part," Victoria protested with a laugh. "They show your personality." Alexander studied the sketch over her shoulder. It's close enough that she could smell his subtle cologne and feel the warmth radiating from his body. "It's perfect." "It's not finished yet," Victoria said, suddenly nervous about his proximity. "I still need to work on the background details and the lighting. Take all the time you need, there's no rush." But there was a rush, Victoria realized. Every day she spent in Alexander's orbit made it harder to maintain the emotional distance she knew was necessary. Their worlds were simply too different, their circumstances too unequal for anything real to develop between them. Her phone buzzed with a text message, and Victoria's heart sank as she read it. "I'm sorry, but I need to cut today short. There's a family emergency." "What's wrong?" Alexander asked immediately, his concern genuine and immediate. "My brother Marcus was in a car accident. He's at Seattle General." Victoria was already gathering her art supplies, her hands shaking slightly. "I need to get to the hospital." "I'll drive you," Alexander said, without hesitation. "You don't need to do that. I can take the bus." "Victoria, don't be ridiculous. Let me help." 20 minutes later, they were pulling up to the hospital emergency entrance. Victoria had remained silent during the drive, her worry evident despite her attempts to stay composed. Alexander wanted to comfort her, but wasn't sure how to breach the walls she'd built around herself. "I'll wait for you," he said as she prepared to get out of the car. "You don't have to. This could take hours, and Tommy has school tomorrow. Tommy's with his tutor today, not leaving you here alone." Something in his tone brooked no argument, and Victoria was too worried about Marcus to maintain her usual fierce independence. She nodded gratefully and hurried into the hospital. 4 hours later, Alexander was still in the waiting room when Victoria finally emerged from the emergency department. Her face was pale with exhaustion, but her expression was relieved. "He's going to be okay," she said, sinking into the chair beside Alexander. "Broken ribs, concussion, but nothing life-threatening. He was lucky." "Thank God," Alexander replied, and Victoria could see that he genuinely meant it. "What happened?" "Wrong place, wrong time. Someone ran a red light." Victoria rubbed her temples wearily. "The doctors want to keep him for observation, but his insurance is basic coverage. The bills are going to be astronomical." Alexander's expression shifted slightly, and Victoria could practically see the calculations happening behind his eyes. "Victoria, let me help with the medical expenses. Please, before you say no, hear me out. This isn't charity or pity. It's one person helping another during a crisis." "Alexander, I can't accept that kind of money from you." "Why not?" "Because you think it comes with strings attached. Because you think I'm trying to buy your affection." The directness of his question caught Victoria off guard. "Are you?" Alexander was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the hospital waiting room. "I don't know," he admitted finally. "Maybe I was initially. I'm used to solving problems with resources, used to people being grateful for my help. But these past few weeks have taught me something important." "What's that?" "The things I value most about you. Your integrity, your independence. Your refusal to be impressed by wealth are exactly the things that money can't buy and shouldn't influence." Victoria felt tears threatening for the first time that day. "Then why does it feel like you're trying to fix my life every time we're together?" "'Cause I care about you," Alexander said simply. "More than I've cared about anyone in a very long time. And when you care about someone, you want to make their struggles easier." "But that's exactly the problem," Victoria replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need to know that I can handle my own struggles, that I'm strong enough to build my own life without someone else's money smoothing the way." Alexander nodded, slowly beginning to understand. "Even if it means your brother's medical bills will put you in debt for years. Even then." Victoria's voice was firm, despite the tears now falling freely. "Because if I let you pay for this, where does it end? Do you pay my rent next month when the bills pile up? Buy me a car when mine breaks down? Fund my art career when galleries won't represent me? Would that be so terrible?" Victoria said fiercely. "Because then I'd never know if I achieved anything because of my own talent and effort, or because Alexander Sterling opened doors for me. I'd never know if you cared about me, or just the gratitude version of me that your money created." Pain in her voice cut Alexander deeper than any business rejection ever had. He was beginning to realize that his wealth, which had always been his greatest advantage, might be the one insurmountable obstacle to winning Victoria's heart. "So where does that leave us?" he asked quietly. Victoria wiped her eyes, trying to compose herself. I don't know. Wish I did, but I don't know. They sat in silence for several minutes, the weight of unspoken feelings heavy between them. Finally, Alexander spoke again. What if I told you that I'm willing to figure it out together? I'm willing to learn how to care about someone without trying to fix or change their circumstances. I'd say that sounds almost impossible for someone like you. Maybe, Alexander acknowledged. But you've already changed me in ways I didn't think were possible. 3 months ago, I would have written a check and walked away, assuming that solved everything. Now I'm sitting in a hospital waiting room at midnight, trying to understand why the woman I'm falling in love with won't let me help her. Victoria's breath caught at his words. You're falling in love with me? Completely, Alexander admitted. Inconveniently, probably foolishly, but yes. Victoria stared at him, seeing not the billionaire businessman but the man who had spent hours in an uncomfortable hospital chair, who listened to her brother's jokes when Marcus was finally awake enough to be charming, who understood why she needed to pay her own way even when it made everything harder. I'm falling in love with you too, she whispered. That's what makes this so complicated. Alexander reached for her hand, and this time she didn't pull away. Then let's be complicated together. Let's figure out how to make this work without compromising who you are or what you need. And if we can't figure it out, then at least we'll know we tried. But Victoria, I think we're both stronger than our circumstances. Your independence and my resources don't have to be opposing forces. Maybe they can be complementary strengths. Victoria looked down at their joined hands, feeling the possibility of something real and lasting for the first time in her adult life. It won't be easy. The best things never are. 6 months later, Victoria stood in her first solo gallery exhibition, surrounded by her drawings of Seattle's hidden corners and forgotten people. The opening night crowd was a mix of art enthusiasts, local media, and curious society figures drawn by the novelty of work that captured authentic human experience rather than abstract concepts. Alexander stood near the back of the gallery, watching Victoria discuss her techniques with a respected art critic. He had kept his promise, offering emotional support, but no financial interference. Victoria had earned this exhibition through her own talent and persistence. Though Alexander's presence in her life had given her the confidence to pursue opportunities she might have otherwise considered out of reach. She's remarkable, said the gallery owner, approaching Alexander with obvious satisfaction. 3 pieces sold in the first hour, and the Times critic seems genuinely impressed. Alexander smiled, his pride in Victoria evident. She is remarkable, and she's accomplished all of this entirely on her own merit. Tommy appeared at his father's elbow, carefully balancing a plate of cheese and crackers. Is Victoria famous? Now, getting there, Alexander replied, ruffling his son's hair. Are you proud of her? Super proud. And she said we can pick which drawing we want for my room. As the evening progressed, Alexander found quiet moments to steal glances at Victoria. As she navigated her first taste of artistic success, she wore a simple black dress that highlighted her natural grace, and her confidence had grown exponentially since their first meeting in that little cafe. Near the end of the evening, Victoria finally made her way to where Alexander waited. With Tommy, so how does it feel to be a celebrated artist? Alexander asked, wrapping his arms around her waist. Surreal, Victoria admitted, leaning into his embrace. But also right, somehow. Like this is what I was meant to be doing. Dad bought your favorite drawing, Tommy announced proudly. The one of the old man reading to his grandson in the park. Victoria looked at Alexander with surprise. You bought one of my pieces? Wanted to own something created by the woman I love, Alexander said simply. Though I paid full price, same as everyone else, Victoria stood on her tiptoes to kiss him softly. Thank you for understanding why that matters. Thank you for teaching me the difference between fixing someone's problems and supporting their dreams. As they prepared to leave the gallery together, Victoria reflected on how much had changed since that rainy evening when she'd saved Tommy from an oncoming truck. She had learned that love didn't require the sacrifice of independence, and Alexander had discovered that the most valuable things in life couldn't be purchased or controlled. Their relationship remained complicated, requiring constant communication and compromise. But they had found a way to build something real together, something that honored both Victoria's need for self-determination and Alexander's desire to care for the people he loved. Outside the gallery, Seattle's evening lights twinkled like promises of future adventures. Victoria Chen, celebrated artist, walked hand in hand with Alexander Sterling, reformed billionaire, while Tommy skipped ahead of them, chattering excitedly about which drawing he would choose for his bedroom wall. Love, they had learned, was not about buying or being bought. It was about choosing each other, again and again, with full knowledge of both the complications and the possibilities that choice would bring.